So, hello. It's so good to see you, Taylor. I'm so looking forward to this conversation with you and to just be able to converse with somebody who spends so much of their time thinking about some of the very same things as me, both professionally and in terms of our delights and hobbies and what we love to do as well. Getting to know you recently, for our listeners, we recently met in person at a retreat that we were both working, and it was such a joy to get to share with you about men's sexuality and what we're doing in this world and why we're doing it and our love of music and all of it. So I'm so grateful to know you and excited to chat with you
Yeah,
today.
same. Happy to be here. So we'll teach all you listening some polyrhythmic masturbation techniques for the, from the musical world. It's going to be great.
Oh my gosh, so good. So, for those of you who do not know Taylor, Taylor is a men's coach and a facilitator. He really specializes in men's sexuality, helping men create incredible, epic sex lives by combining esoteric sexual wisdom with Western practicality and science. When I first saw Taylor's work, I was so stoked because it's so in resonance with what I care most deeply about and what I am so excited about sharing and what I spend a lot of time nerding out on. So this is such a it's such a an exciting and beautiful topic for me to get to ask you about, because I've got so many curiosities for you, and there's the beauty of it's like a the third entity of when two people who really are passionate about something bring the life experience, the nerding out on both the esoteric wisdom and the
Totally.
practical science, and like the little nooks and crannies that can be found in the exploration of that. So
Yeah.
yay, I'm so
Yeah.
excited.
Happy to be here with you. I feel like we're a similar species in many
Totally.
ways, thinking about the same stuff, and happy to be here with you too, the person listening. Like, welcome and thanks for, yeah, opening yourself to me, a new person on the podcast, and to this conversation. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. So Taylor, I first got acquainted with your work probably a couple of years ago. Just I think somebody sent me something from you because of what the general topic around men's sexuality. There aren't a whole lot of people within this field of study, and
Hmm.
what I was so drawn to was this quality of deeply I could feel your esoteric understandings and your understandings and your capacity to convey subtlety in what you were sharing, but then also the depth of practicality and how much you really share the studies you've done on your own system, your own body with your partner, who is a dear friend of mine as well. And also the studies that you've done in terms of understanding research and numbers and what percentage of men have this and what percentage of men experience this. And I find that it creates such a holistic understanding of what men are, I would say, up against, but it's like that internal up against, like what men are grappling with, what men are finding challenging, and also what men are really interested in and curious about navigating and exploring in their own sexuality. Like I just shared, getting to meet you in person was sort of a reiteration of that, where I was like, oh, you feel the subtleties, you feel the energetics, you feel the depth of the spiritual potential within sexuality, but then also there's this very clear understanding of the mechanics of all of it, which I fucking love. So I'd love to just start off chatting a little bit about getting like a laying some groundwork for what we're talking about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on sexual embodiment, what sexual embodiment is, what I mean, you can even start with what is embodiment in general, but specifically
Yeah.
sexual embodiment, sexual mastery, just so we can kind of get on a level playing ground here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for that introduction, and thanks for all that. And just if you're watching this and you notice like, oh, interesting. Taylor's teaching this sexual mastery stuff, but he looks a little tired. I wonder what's up with that. Just context. Like I was up all night with my dog last night, not happily. I mean, happily, but the dog was not having a good time.
Mm.
So a little sleep deprived right now. And also totally stoked to be here at the same time. And so
You'd be
Sexual
even
mastery
more
and
sleep deprived if you didn't practice sexual mastery.
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. So sexual mastery, sexual embodiment. I mean, that can mean so many different things to different people. You know, what I'll say first is it's definitely not where I came from. Like
Mm,
I got into this work because I used to just struggle so immensely with sex, you know, all the dysfunctions, premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, porn addiction, like sexual anxiety, like all this kind of stuff. I was the epitome of what sexual embodiment is not, you know. And just like afraid to initiate sex with my partner, but also wanting to. And then when I was doing it, I would be anxious, but I wouldn't know that I was anxious. And it's just kind of like a mess, and not being sure how to do what here and there. And contrast that with now, which is after many, many years of study and practice, which started because I realized like, I'm not going to be satisfied as a man if I don't know what it's like to have good sex. Like I have got to figure this out. Like this sucks. This just
yeah.
sucks. And I don't feel like a man, you know, because
Yeah.
I can't have sex for longer than a minute, et cetera, et cetera. So now for me, my own sexual embodiment is how, like, when I show up for sex with my partner, just being like, it's kind of silly to say, but just really in my body and not caught up here in my head, but noticing the sensations that are happening internally in my chest and being aware of if I am up here in my head. And if you're not watching the video, I'm gesturing to my head, then knowing the practices that I can do to bring me more into my body for the sake of better connection with my lover and better presence and connection with myself too, you know?
Yeah.
So that's like the in the moment sexual embodiment piece that I like to think about. But then also with the traditions that I've worked with, and I'm, you know, imagine you too, sexual embodiment is seen as so much more than just how you approach the sex act.
Mm,
It's how do you approach sex in general, masturbation, pornography, like the topic of flirtation, sexual energy in your life across the board. And how does that show up when you're at work, when you're dealing with your family or your children or your friends? And so sexual embodiment is all of those things, can be all of those things if you're aware of it. And that's not to say like while you're at work, you're having sexual thoughts while you're leading a meeting or in a meeting or something like that. But it's being aware of the impact of all the sexual choices you've made up until that point, and then the cumulative effect of those sexual choices on your ability to deliver an amazing talk or a less amazing talk based on your choices.
yeah. That's such a beautiful way of putting it because I think sometimes we can segment or compartmentalize. Here's me as a sexual being, and then here's me in the rest of my life. And
For sure.
I see that sex and life are so not separate in a lot of
Mm,
different ways. Like even what you just spoke to around feeling, we can feel our masculinity or femininity very much tied up in our sex, our experience as a man or a woman. Like that can be very much dictated by how we experience sex. So it's almost like this sandbox for us to really get to work with ourselves in um, such a profound way that makes very, very clear, distinct, powerful ripples. And like you said, when you have a mastery of your sexual energy, when you are sexually embodied, when you're in your being, when you're in your heart, when you're in your cock, when you're in your belly, and not only in your head, you're going to engage with life in such a different way. And when I think about a sexually embodied man, I think of that as something very similar in feeling to a martial artist, where it's
mm,
like you can feel their mastery. You can feel their energetic sovereignty to the space around them. You can feel their knowing of themselves. You can feel the power of them when they walk in the room, even if they're the quietest one there. There's this essence that is so deeply powerful, and a lot of the men who I've spoken to or worked with who have developed a sexual mastery practice say that everything shifts when they really develop an embodied practice. The work opportunities, the women who are drawn to them, the way that they can show up as a father, all of these things are magnetized and refined in this process, in this practice.
totally. And one thing that I like to say up front too to normalize is it's not like I or anyone. It's not like you, if you're listening and you're like, oh, that sounds nice, but how the fuck do I do that? It's not like you're going to arrive there someday and then it's all going to be good.
Right.
It's not like this final destination. I really like to think of it as a path.
Hmm.
And it's a path that we get to walk towards. And just like any path in life, like sometimes things can pull us off or we can deviate a little bit. And like maybe we go through a phase where being at the tip top sexual performance isn't as important to us for a
Right.
few months or 6 months or maybe even a year, depending on our timeline. But we still have this sort of path of intentional sexuality that we can come back to. And that's still guiding our decisions, even if we're not doing like all the biggest practices every day of the week.
Yeah.
And I'll speak for myself. Like, I go in and out of phases of wanting to be at my tip top sexual performance. And I've grown to just be totally happy with that and satisfied with that. And I know like maybe, like last year, for example, if I bought a house, first time ever with my partner,
Yeah.
love it. And I was so excited to do, like to build things and change things and put in a new kitchen and like build an outdoor shower and do all these different projects. And during that time, I was like, well, these sexual practices don't feel as important to me, specifically the ones to, cultivate like the actual in the moment sexual experience.
Mhm.
So I let that go for a little while and it did show up in my actual experience of sex. And then I realized, okay, it's time to get back on that practice. And then it was fine. It was glorious after that. So just like to normalize the path aspect of it all too.
Totally, totally. And I think that's also a supportive way to stay on the path, because otherwise it can be this like, well, I've been off for a couple weeks, so now I have to start over at the beginning, but it's
For sure.
actually just a continuous meeting yourself there. And I've experienced something similar where sometimes I'll get off of my own practice and because it doesn't feel as relevant in that time, and then it does show up, but my body knows those practices. So then when I go back to
Totally.
them, it's like, all right, here we are again. And
Yeah.
it becomes more integrated, it becomes more of a way of life, it becomes a more embodied norm.
Yeah, because you've gone through a period of time where you worked to create a foundation of that, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine
Yeah.
similar to myself. Like there was a long period of time where I thought, like, okay, I need to do this for an extended period of time just to fundamentally shift my reality to the
Yeah.
point where I have a new baseline.
Yeah.
And once that new baseline is established, then it's easier to deviate a little bit. But if
Absolutely.
you haven't taken the time to really like set up that baseline up front, it's more difficult. So
Exactly.
that's another piece to add to the puzzle too.
I think it's Michael Pollan talks about the sledding tracks
Hmm.
in How to Change Your Mind. And he says, when we have a way that we've always done something. We have our little sled and we're on a snowy slope and we sort of crunch our way down. We're figuring out whatever it is, that habit, that way of engaging with sex, whatever it is, and we create a path. And then the next time we go up and it's a little smoother and it's a little smoother and it's a little smoother. And then when all of a sudden we decide, or over time decide this actually isn't the path I want to be taking anymore, and we start another path, it's going to be a little crunchy. We're going to have to kind of push ourselves down the mountain. And if we
Hmm.
start to veer over into the direction of our old path, if we nick the edge, we're going to pretty quickly go right back into that one. But then if we go again and we really intentionally make our way down the mountain and create that new path, we come back up again, we go down it, it's a little easier, it's a little easier, it's a little easier. Meanwhile, that other one is getting filled back in with snow, and
Hmm.
that becomes an easy path to go in. That doesn't mean we never touch that one again, but rather we've created another pathway for ourselves.
Ah, that's a beautiful analogy. I've never heard that before.
It's a good one.
That's
I think it
awesome.
was from that book. I'm gonna double check on that.
It would make sense that it would be from that
Yeah,
book.
it does.
If not, thanks to whoever said that first. Yeah.
You said something a couple minutes ago just around when you get stuck in your head or when you notice that you're in your head and you want to move
Mhm.
back down into embodiment, you touch on a practice that you know gets you there. What's a
Yeah.
practice that you know will immediately get you back down into your body?
Breath, number one, some sort of breath practice, and then some sort of intensive physical exercise. And I would add the caveat that there are very few practices that will like immediately get me back down into my body. There's an element of trust that I've learned to have with these practices. And so say I am feeling up in my head and I think, okay, I notice this is happening. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to come back into my body. What am I going to do? Okay, I don't have the ability to go on a run right now. Maybe I could do a 10-minute breathwork practice or a 2-minute breathwork practice or some push-ups, right? And so I know now that there's this resistance period when I decide to make a change, like, oh, I don't really want to do that. I can just sit around and like, la, 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 you know?
Mhm.
But if I push through that and make it through a minute or two, then the shift slowly starts to happen.
Yeah.
And it's like this, it's like a gradual turnover that shifts into almost like opening a funnel or opening the sieve to where whatever it is up that's up here in my head can sort of like simmer down into the rest of my body.
Mm.
And through different somatic sessions, I've actually watched this happen internally. Like you can feel the sensation, the tingling or the teeming or the pressure or whatever. You'll actually notice it flows down into the rest of your body, like
Mm.
into your belly, into your low back, into your chest, into your legs. It's a really beautiful experience to witness. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about this, how I remembered a time when I was like really worked up and in my head about a lot of stuff. And I thought, it's so frustrated. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go for a walk and I'm going to match my breath with the rhythm of my steps and just trust that it's going to help, you know? And I would say after like 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, I was in a completely fundamentally different
Mm.
state of embodiment. But it took that effort to get there.
Yeah.
And it's not the sort of thing like you can't think your way out of your head.
Right.
You know,
Unfortunately.
you have to do your way out of your head somehow with some practice
Yeah.
or something. Like
Yeah.
I've never been able to think my way out of my head.
Yeah.
Like maybe someone else has that ability, but I haven't learned it yet.
Totally. I feel like breath is just the secret key to everything in general. It tends to be
Yeah,
the key, but I noticed that specifically for moving from head into body, some combination of breath, sound, and movement
totally.
tends to be the quickest way, whether that's movement like sprinting around the house a couple times, movement like shaking your body for a moment. It can also be something more minute, something more subtle, but having some way to shake, move, explore movement, and allowing the breath to not only match with the movement, but to also inform the
Hmm.
movement, to give space to the movement.
For
It
sure.
feels like really some form of that feels like it tends to be the key to that dropping back into the body.
Yeah. And for me, this is a really important of sexual mastery. Like if we're going to loop it back around to sex, because most people know how to put something into a body part, right? Like, you know how to place your penis into somebody, but it's all the other stuff that makes it so complicated.
Yeah.
So example, one time my partner and I, our bedroom is over that way. I pointed to the left if you're not watching the video. And there was a point at which some point I don't know months ago, like we were in one of those moments, you know how you get into in long-term relationship where like we wanted to be intimate and there was just this kind of like this crunch and we just couldn't move beyond the crunch and
Mhm.
it felt awkward and neither of us were feeling sexy and I really wanted to in that moment have a beautiful sexual experience and I thought, okay, I'm in my head, what do I need to do to take a leadership role here to create what it is that I want? And so I was like, hey babe, I'm gonna actually just step out for a few minutes and I'll come back. And when I went out, I did what I will now in this moment call an advanced push-up. Or we could call it a somatic push-up. And in that moment, I knew that, okay, I have to get out of my head. I have to get into my body. I have to get in touch with the more primal, alive part of myself if I want to have a good experience with her. So I went out into a different room and I started doing really slow push ups and paying attention to
Mhm.
all the subtleties in my body and matching my breath with the motion of my body going up and down and making a growling sound matching with my breath too. And I did that like, probably like 20 times, just boom, total change of my whole state. Like I felt in my body again. I was out of my head. I didn't even care about the thing that we were like crunchy about earlier.
Yeah.
And then I went back in the room and led from that place. And we had a really beautiful sexual
Mm.
experience.
Growling for the win, for real though. Like breath,
Yeah.
movement, and growling. If you got those three in, take nothing more from this conversation. Breath,
Yeah.
movement, and growls will tend to do the trick.
Totally. Also make sure
Mm.
you drink water and eat
Mm.
food.
Yeah, also important. Also
Yeah.
important. You said something a moment ago about intentional sexuality, and what you were just speaking to with those push-ups feels very much like the definition of intentional sexuality, where you are present to all of it. You are present to how your breath and your movement and your sounds are actually all working together, and how all of that is the expression of the present moment, of the truth of the present moment, of what you're experiencing, of getting yourself back in your body, an expression of the body. And I think that within sexual mastery or sexual performance, the focus can often be on this, well, how am I performing, or how is this looking, or what is the response that I'm seeing that represents that I've done the right actions. But it's so
Mhm.
much more about that intentionality and that presence with every aspect, the presence, the curiosity, and the alignment to the truth of the moment, to really feeling what's real right now. What am I experiencing? What are we experiencing? And what is needed in this moment to bring more life to the moment, to the sexual experience?
Totally. And in my experience and opinion, that paying attention to those things, being attuned and connected to yourself and partner, like that's the thing that generates performance, not actually worrying about performance. You know,
Completely.
the moment you start to worry about performance in sex, like, is the moment you have shot yourself in the foot, and it's hard to recover from. It's possible, but it kind of starts this downward spiral. It can
Mhm.
start this downward spiral, you know, because like the moment you start thinking like, oh, I don't, what if I don't get an erection, or what if I don't, ejaculate too soon, or what if she doesn't like this, or what, anything like that, it immediately starts like a little minor stress response, like a
Yeah.
little minor cortisol response. And that's like the erection
That's right.
killer
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
libido killer, So it's as much a mental practice as it is learning techniques. Like, and I like that we've been in this conversation for however long, 20 minutes ish or so. Like, we haven't talked about the microcosmic orbit or the big draw or Kegels or anything like that. We're talking about all these other things that, in my opinion, are in many ways more important,
Yeah,
as like foundational practices to create the full
absolutely.
picture of how we
Absolutely.
approach
And
sex.
if you're not feeling yourself and you're not present, then it's going to be very hard for the microcosmic orbit to do anything. And I
For
think,
sure.
when I ask women, I love taking polls of like how many, what women are wanting or looking for, or
Hmm.
um, getting some of the juicy details, and then I see my role as the translator. So here's what they're saying. And so
Great.
many women who I speak to and who I ask, when I say, what is it that makes a great lover, or what is it that you're craving so deeply, 75% of them, that is not an accurate number, but something around there, is they say presence. They say, I'm really looking for presence. My best lovers have been the ones that are present. And it really speaks to the importance of the energetics behind, rather than the actual movement. And I
Hmm.
see sometimes it can be like, well, okay, how do I be present then? Because I'm trying to be present, but what am I even being present with? And I'm present, but then I'm also trying to keep my erection, or I'm present, but then I'm being present to what's going on in my body, or is it what's going on in her body? And I think what we were just speaking to, this essence of curiosity, of feeling what's actually happening, of being willing and able to actually just simply feel what's true and happening in your body, and then give it breath, give it movement, give it growls, is what brings us back into presence. That curiosity and that willingness to just be with what is real, as opposed to it needing to be any kind of performance. And when you bring that, typically that creates the most powerful sexual experiences that either of you have ever experienced.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to add another piece that I don't know if I said completely earlier, but this piece around presence. So when I work with guys, I imagine you do a similar thing. Like, I have them do different self pleasure practices and incorporate breath and movement and sound and squeezing different things, different kinds of techniques. And I also give them the heads up that, like, hey, if you've never done anything like this before, it's very likely that you're going to have a really hard time with it mentally, because when's the last time you actually sat present with yourself without distraction for 20 minutes? Very rare, with all our distractions and our phones and our notifications these days. So I really encourage guys to take up an additional, some kind of presence practice on a regular basis to cultivate just your own psychological ability to have a sustained presence, for a minute. like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Just start practicing that. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's some sort of breath work, maybe it's a slow moving qigong or yoga or something. But I think that is also, if we had a diagram of all the different components of what makes sexual mastery, like that would be one of them that's equally important to train,
Yeah,
because if your mind starts wandering all over the place in sex, not only is your partner going to feel it, but it's going to be much harder for you to have the kind of sex that you want to have too.
completely. And it's so ironic because so many of the men who I speak to, work with, have some kind of practice of intentionally distracting themselves in order to quote unquote perform the way that they would like to. I've
Hmm.
heard a whole range of what men distract themselves with. Baseball, grandma, and garbage are three that I've like repeatedly heard. They're like,
Wow.
how do I distract myself? I think about one of these two things. But
Grandma, huh?
I know that one was a little shocking for me, especially when I heard it more than once. I was like, huh. But I guess that's one way to stop yourself from getting too high in arousal.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Well, can I just like riff on that for a
yeah,
second? Like,
totally.
yeah. So I don't want to. I kind of do, and I kind of don't want to demonize that, but I just want to like say that I empathize with and I understand a strategy of that, right? Like one
Totally.
of the strategies that's very effective of that is you're diverting your attention from what is typically a hyper focus on the genitals. Most of us guys, like we've trained ourselves through habitual masturbation to focus so much on the sensations in our genitals that we're not even aware that it's possible to experience pleasure in other parts of our body. So when
Exactly.
we start having sex, all of our attention hyper focuses on that area of ourselves, and it's like it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So if you start thinking about grandma or whatever, like it's a in some ways there's a usefulness to the technique of not thinking about your penis and focusing on that, and also on the flip side, like it actually takes you away from the sexual experience itself. And there
Exactly.
are other techniques that can help you move the pleasure and circulate it, but
Absolutely.
just want to
And
like celebrate the usefulness of it and the why behind part of it too.
totally. And it's a why so many men do that is because it works, right? It takes away the intensity of focus on this one area of the body. And like you're saying, unfortunately, it also takes you out of presence with the sexual experience and also out of presence with your own body. And it's very hard to have control over your energy and what's happening in your body. Control, not in a rigid sense, but control in the sense of I can breathe into other areas of my body. When you're not present with your body at all, it's very hard to actually have a say in where anything is going or moving or have that sort of finesse within those levels of arousal. And so
Mhm.
while the distraction brings you out of the intensity of focus on your cock, it also brings you out of presence with your body. And when you can't feel your energy, it's very hard to have a say in where it goes and what it does. And so, just like you're saying, the importance of in those moments, how do I not stay so hyper focused on like the one sensation that feels like it's going to push me over the edge, but how do I also stay very deeply present? Can I focus on my breath? Can I focus on my heart? Can I focus on starfishing my arms and legs and letting that arousal spread through me? And so there's a way to have both of those very much in action and to feel yourself even deeper and to feel your partner even deeper while also not hyper focusing on this one area.
For sure.
Mm.
Yeah. And then if you do want to hyper focus for the sake of fun, go for it.
Yeah.
And then switch it up.
Totally. And
Yeah.
that's actually something I so appreciate about the way you work and that I so resonate with is that there can sometimes be quite a lot of dogmatic approaches to sexual mastery. I think specifically for men, where it's like, if you ejaculate, then you're going to lose your masculinity. It's like can get a little bit shamey and a little bit like, here's the way that you have to do it or else you're losing your life force and et cetera, et cetera. And something I really appreciate about you and that I really try and bring in is the fuck around and find out and feel what works for you and also dedicate
Totally.
yourself to practices and experimenting and exploring with these thousands of years old practices that do work, but the quality of curiosity, exploration, and it's sex, so ideally we're enjoying it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Fuck around and find out. Like for
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
And then bring intentionality into the fucking around and finding out and
Yes.
then find out some new stuff.
Exactly.
You know?
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, Yeah, I definitely went through a phase in my own journey of being super rigid with practices
Mm.
and super like uh, prescriptive with the amount of time I was doing different things, like do Kegels for this amount of time, do Qigong for this amount of time,
Yeah.
do X, Y, and Z, da, 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 da. And it created this internal landscape of rigidity,
Mm.
and it created like an element of my personality as being more rigid. And ultimately that wasn't the direction I wanted to go. Like, of course I still have some rigid patterns that everyone can probably see, and like those I cultivated into me. So I've worked on like letting some of those go and finding the joy in being a little bit more like fluid with things while also still being able to hold a structure for myself. Like there's a balance between both of those things. And I think I really did need to swing very far into the rigid category for a period of time, because prior to that I was in a very, very flowy period of my life, and I needed to swing
Yeah.
the pendulum to get both. But now like the integration of those two I think is really important
Yeah.
ultimately. Yeah,
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think every man is at a different stage in his own process. I mean, every human, we're at a
for
different
sure.
stage in like what how much structure versus how much flow actually allows us to be in the deepest relationship to ourselves, the most freedom, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So you have this term that you speak about that you call integrative semen retention,
Hmm.
and I'm wondering if you could talk about what that is and what your journey has been with this.
So integrative semen retention, I put the word integrative in front of it because the term semen retention, in my opinion, is, well, not my opinion, like objectively on the internet and on different YouTube videos, you have thousands of people saying that it means different things, right? And there's a lot of people who see the term semen retention and they immediately think, oh, that means never ejaculate. Why wouldn't
Mhm.
ever do that? Fuck that. I'm out,
Yeah.
and like write it off immediately. So like, oh, what does integrative semen retention mean? I imagine that opens some more people's minds to the possibility. And for me, it also like it means an integrative approach. So non-dogmatic approach. It means an approach of fucking around and finding out, and
Yeah.
specifically finding out an ideal, what I like to call an ideal ejaculation frequency. And so I believe that all of us of men, depending on whatever our age is, our lifestyle, wherever we are, depending on our workload, or if we're on vacation or not, what season it is, all kinds of factors play into it. And it can change throughout the year, but that all of us have some sort of ideal frequency of how often we should ejaculate on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, etc. I found for me, I'm 39 years old. Ideally, mine is once every 10 days or so, and I can have as much sex as I want in the middle. And I find that when I do that, I am able to have just a higher sustained level of zest and clarity in my mind, and ingenuity and inventiveness and creativity, and a spark that just doesn't exist in the same way if I'm ejaculating multiple times in the week. And so if you're listening and you're like, well, I'm very happy with my level of ejaculations in my life, great. Like, I also am not wanting to come at this from a dogmatic angle and say you should stop ejaculating so often. Like, if you're stoked about your life, great. Why would I want you to change anything? And if there are some elements in your life that you think you could improve upon, and some of those elements might be motivation, or different areas of success, or more mental clarity, or you want to feel more alive or on purpose, or anything even related to any of those, then this could be something to look at,
Yeah.
because the choice to, and the experience of ejaculatory orgasm, it impacts us on a more than just that moment level. Like, it gives neurochemical changes and hormonal changes that show up in tests, like for many days beyond the actual
Yeah.
ejaculation itself, and so for me, integrative semen retention is the practice of just being really intentional of the impact of my ejaculations on my life and those around me, and also being intentional with my sexual energy and my cultivation of my own arousal, and having sex when I don't ejaculate sometimes, but
Yeah.
instead have other kinds of orgasms. Or maybe I don't even have an orgasm, but I just let the energy circulate in my system and it feels good. And I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Two things I want to ask you about, and one
Yeah.
is within the, I would call it intentional ejaculation. Something that
Hmm.
I see often when people are practicing semen retention is this, like I said, sort of almost dogmatic or like very strict with themselves. This process of, okay, I shouldn't ejaculate. I'm trying to do this and I don't want to start over at day one. And it
Totally.
becomes very tight and very rigid.
Hmm.
And something that I really encourage the men that I work with to explore is when you do ejaculate, whether it's on purpose or not, like fucking love it. Like love the
Totally.
shit out of it. Be like, yes,
Yeah,
we're doing this. Like give yourself to the experience because otherwise the ejaculation still happens, but like the expansive depth of the orgasmic experience isn't as much there.
for
And
sure.
there's a lot of stuff around ejaculation being a potential energy leak. The way I see it, shame is the biggest energy leak. And so if
Totally.
you're replacing your practice with like this very shameful experience where it's like, oh God, I shouldn't feel that. I shouldn't do that. Make it stop, it actually drains even more energy because it's this relationship to self. And so I'm curious what your experience is of moving from, like you said, how you maybe had a little bit more of a strict practice. And I'm not sure if during that time, if you were more strict also with how frequently you were ejaculating, but what
Mm.
your experience has been with intentional ejaculations where you as a very sexually embodied man can very wholeheartedly choose when to ejaculate and what that experience is like for you and your partner.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different directions we could go with that, but what I will say, just first off, is that making the fundamental shift from ejaculating every sexual experience by default to ejaculating just some of the time by intentional choice changed the whole sexual experience for me, but also any woman who I've had sex with since I started doing this.
Mm.
And like, if you've never done that, you don't know, or you might not just be aware of how much thought, pressure, awareness, concentration all revolves around when and whether or not the man ejaculates. Like for everybody involved, for the woman, for the man, like it's the ultimate experience of sex, unconsciously or even consciously for a lot of people. So when you take that away and then you open up other doors of possibility, all of a sudden there's this whole other that field of doors, right? A field of new doors that you could walk through of possibility in the sexual experience, where that one way path to ejaculation doesn't happen. So maybe you make love for 20 minutes longer in this other position, or maybe you find that you both enter this wild, like cosmic orgasmic experience together because you chose to not end the sexual experience, but then to dive deeper into the sexual experience and spread the pleasure throughout your whole system. And so it's made the sexual experience much more special. And also, it makes it the case that whenever I do choose to have an ejaculation with a partner, it's so much more pleasurable,
Mm.
right? And it's so much more special
Yeah.
because it's not happening by default. And they understand that, and I understand that. So it becomes this more like mutual celebration
Yeah.
of like, wow, this thing is happening and it's so erotic and it's so sexy. And there's so much more like, uh, just I was going to say juice, then I wasn't going to say juice, but yeah, I'll just fight juice. There's so much more juice to it. You know what I mean? Like it's a more special experience overall.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
there's like, when I talk to women who have had sex with other women, oftentimes what you'll hear is the first time they've had sex with another woman was a revelatory experience for them, not only because they're having sex with another woman, but because it's not this one-way path to ejaculatory orgasm that ends the sexual experience. And for many women, this is the first time they've ever experienced something like that. And they're
Yeah.
just like, holy God, I had no idea there was another reality that was possible. And like that level of realization is also possible for men. And that level of like pleasure that's possible is also possible for men if you just sometimes choose to press pause
Yeah.
on that and see what else is out there,
Yeah.
beyond that.
Beautiful. There's the terminology goal oriented sex versus pleasure oriented sex, and what you're speaking to very much touches on this concept around when there's not this one thing that needs to happen or this one thing that we're trying not to have happen, or just that there's not this one focus where this is the event, which can be ejaculation, but it also can be her orgasm as well,
For
where
sure.
sometimes both men
100%.
and women can have that be the goal. But when there's this approach where we don't need to make anything happen, there's not a point where things finish. It opens up a lot of potential. And I like to reframe it instead of goal oriented versus pleasure oriented. I like to think of it as, because goals actually really work for a lot of us to like have something to wrap our heads around or to direct ourselves towards, but rather
Totally.
what has my goal been and what would I like my
Mm,
goal to be? So is my goal actually how much more pleasure can we experience? How much deeper can we go? How much more
totally.
curiosity can we bring? How much more creativity can I bring to every gentle touch? And
Mhm.
redirecting the goal away from one moment into how much more deeply can I experience this sexual experience?
Yeah. I like that goal. It's a great goal.
Yeah,
There was one other piece I wanted to add about the integrative semen retention piece. Are you cool if I circle back for a second?
please, absolutely.
So you might be thinking, if you're listening to this, well, of course you would say these things. You're a sex educator. You want people to like buy into these concepts and ideas. And I just want to like go back in time a little bit and say that prior to being where I am right now, which is a coach and a sex educator, like I was in a totally different career. I was a full-time photographer and filmmaker in the business world, doing photo shoots for very large companies and
Hence your
corporations, and
perfect lighting.
hence the perfect lighting. Yes, in the studio. And what was so interesting was while I was on my journey to improve my sex life in my mid to late 20s, and then transitioning into the beginning of that photography career, I noticed that not only was my sex life improving,
Mm,
but that also the oomph and the sort of juice and the zest that I was starting to get from doing these practices and then starting to not ejaculate every time I had sex, it actually started to fill up my business life with more oomph and more zest. And I
totally.
started to feel more motivated, and I started to have more aliveness and more confidence. And I started to make more money, like substantially more money, and work with bigger clients and have a much easier time negotiating contracts and deals. And it kind of like catapulted me further into that career. And so like that was a big learning point for me, realizing, oh wow, this is why people write books about this
Yeah,
stuff. It's not just because you have better sex, but it's also because it can improve literally every other area of your life when you
totally.
treat this with intentionality. And so like
Absolutely.
that's one of the reasons I get so excited about this too. And I'm sure you have this experience when you're working with men, but same with me. Like men sign up because they want to become better at sex, and then like 8 weeks into the program, they're like, "Oh my god, like my business is thriving,"
Mhm. Yep.
or like my relationship with my children has improved, or whatever it is. And they say, "Oh, I didn't expect this.
Yeah.
This is crazy." And I'm like, "Well, it's not that crazy if you think about it."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we're in week 10 of my one of my 12-week programs right now, and a couple weeks ago, one of the guys was like, "I see what we're doing. Like, sex is just the carrot. I see what's actually going on here." Yeah,
Yeah, people have
and
said similar things.
yeah, and I very much experienced that when I started, like you're saying, when I started this process within my own discovery of my sexuality. And that's without even the practice of semen retention because I don't have semen, but they simply the
What?
practice of getting to know myself in that way and learning to cultivate and master and have a say in my energy. It completely
Mhm.
shifted who I am. It completely changed who I am as a woman, as a lover, as I wasn't a wife back then when I started, but who I am as a partner, and how my confidence in music, in my business, in just simply how I show up in the world completely turned on its head
Yeah.
entirely, including who I became a match for in all areas of my life, like the people, the clients who were drawn to me. Even within the partnership that I was in, when I started working around my sexuality, it was like we both got to meet each other in such deeper ways. So there was a whole other layer of knowing and vulnerability and openness and intimacy and communication, everything shifted in my relationship, in my friendships, in really truly everything. It's incredible how much sexuality truly is like this window into everything else, this little mirror to the rest of our lives. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So thank you for being here, listening to this podcast or watching this podcast and thinking about this and being open to these ideas. And thank you, Fabian, for like being another beacon of a human out there who's spreading the good word about this kind of stuff.
So good.
It's so important. And I think like the world really needs it. You know, the world really
Yeah.
needs people who are in touch with this part of themselves.
Mm.
And if you think about it in terms of, uh, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or if we just talk about just the hierarchy of needs as a human, right? What are our base needs? Well, one, you need to survive. You need food, water, housing, shelter, right? That's like the most base level that we could get as humans. We need to survive. And if you think about it, evolutionarily speaking, that's what we need. That's like the most important thing.
Mm.
What's number two? Evolutionarily speaking, it's procreation,
Yeah.
sex. Like, okay, you have survived long enough now to be able to procreate. Now you need to have sex so you can perpetuate the species. Like that is your main biological directive. Like get to it. And then you get the other needs that get stacked on top of that, like
Mm.
community, play, friendship, all that kind of stuff, etc. But the fundamental sort of survivalist drive towards that procreation, towards sex, is so deeply wound up at the core of our identity that it's my opinion that if we don't do work around that, like no wonder the world is the way that it is. you know like it's such an unconscious driver of our behavior
Yeah.
that if we just live a sexual life that's based on all the input that we have gotten from society and porn, like we're probably going to be unintentionally hurting people
Yeah.
at best, you know? And I don't know if I've made that point clear enough. Like, I think my brain got a little twisted in there, but I was trying to highlight just how core and central
Mm.
sex and sexual energy and sexual pursuit is to our deep psychology and our deep evolutionary biology, and how important it is to actually work with that.
I so wholeheartedly agree. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the societal programming that in today's day and age is most holding men back from their fullest expression, from their connection to self, their sexual mastery. What do you feel like in today's society and in the programming of the past 50 years or however far back you want to go, do you feel like really holds back men today?
Gosh, I mean, yeah, well, so many things. The easy one to pick off the top and to blame for a lot of things is porn.
Porn.
I don't think that's I'm probably the last generation of people out there that actually grew up masturbating to like a little image on the screen that would reveal itself pixel by pixel, and I'd be like, come on, where's the breast? Where's the breast? Come on, come on. And then it would load. I the people who are in their teenage years right now, like, wow, you have a whole different bag of worms to deal with, in terms of the availability of porn. So that's one, but I don't want to go down that pathway because that's talked about in so many different places. Like another one that's not talked about as much actually would be that men are so, generally speaking, disconnected from other men, and we don't talk about what's going on for us. We don't share our challenges with our male friends. Like we kind of like try to act like we have it all
Mm,
together and be independent and exude or project this image of strength and having it togetherness,
yeah,
because the messages we've got from society basically are, if you're a man, you got to be strong, like create the world you want, sustain, protect, provide, etc. Anything else means you're not a man, or you're less of a man. And so what that does is it makes a lot of us internalize and push down a lot of the challenges that are very real of living in a society like this and growing up in a society like this. And what I've found is that through being parts of different men's groups and going through different men's retreats and programs and actually connecting with and talking with other men about their shared struggles and the things that I go through, like it relieves this deep pressure
mm,
that then allows for a growth to happen, that maybe I could never have actually had the kind of sex I wanted if I didn't relieve this pressure through talking with a bunch of other men about some of the challenges that I face, and realize that,
Right.
hey, I'm not actually alone in this, you know? And it's one thing to sit here and say that to you on a podcast and have people listen to that. But if you're listening to this podcast, like, it's another thing for you to be in a room full of guys and authentically, vulnerably share about something challenging in your sex life, and have them actually hear you, and you get the embodied resonance of them seeing you. Like, that changes things. I've watched it happen in people like for years now, regularly in my programs and different workshops and events too. Like, you see one guy he'll reveal this part about himself, he'll be like, I've just struggled for so long to like be able to have sex for longer than just a few minutes with my wife. And it's been years and I've never told anybody about this. And then you see like there's these other guys in the room that say, hey bro, like, me too. That's happened for me too. And then all of a sudden the guy that shared that, like, his posture kind of rises, his head lifts a little bit, and then all of a sudden he's like this new person.
Totally.
It's amazing, you
Totally.
know?
Totally. And I think that, like I said, how shame is a huge energy leak, it also is kind of like a lock. And so when there's shame in place, or this feeling of there must be something wrong with me and everybody must know it about me, or I better make sure that nobody ever finds out this information about me, that kind of locks it into place. And once that can be shared about, once that can be revealed in vulnerability, it relieves so much of that pressure on it. It can help remove a layer. It doesn't necessarily just completely eliminate the shame, but it can help to remove this sort of shroud of, I have to keep this hidden, or else I ABC, or else I won't
Yeah.
ABC.
100%. Like, I think that's a huge thing holding men back today. And also because like in those spaces we can lift each other up and like workshop things and share ideas with each other and talk about like, what does it actually mean to be a strong man in the world today? What does it mean to be a man in the world today? And have those conversations with other people who are invested and who actually care about it. And it doesn't sound like learning a sexual technique, but again, like, that to me is also a sexual technique. And you wouldn't want to go into that saying like, I'm here to share my vulnerabilities so I could have a better sex life. Like, you might miss the point, but I think that's a big contributing factor,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I totally agree. It's the de-shamification and the act of being willing to be seen. It
Hmm.
really does make an impact on how you show up intimately. It really truly does.
Yeah,
And also our capacity to take responsibility for making changes in a way that's not self self-shaming, self-blaming, other blaming. It's like,
for
okay,
sure.
this is a very real experience. This is what I'm working with. It's also potentially a very common experience. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. Now what do I do from here? It actually gives an empowerment for action, as opposed to, let's keep this locked down and stuck in place.
Totally. Yeah. Because what you're doing when that happens is you're telling your nervous system, it's not good to let energy, emotion
Mhm.
flow, like stuff it down. So then when you try to circulate or move sexual energy, well, the nervous system has learned that it's not good to do that. So it
Right.
becomes much harder for you to do that because you're not able to let emotions or energy flow throughout your system.
Completely.
There's one other big one that I wanted to name
Yeah.
while we're still here. And that's let's see how to say this. There's this flavor of masculinity that is in many ways craved right now in the world, and in many ways demonized right now in the world at the same time. And it's this strange sort of a head fuck. And if we talk it out, we'll realize that everybody is actually ultimately wanting this just in a certain way. And that is this aspect of masculinity, or being a man, of being this, like, being able to be this fierce,
Yeah.
like capable, like, I will fuck you so good and then I will kill anyone who tries to stand in the way
Yeah.
kind of vibe. And
Totally.
like being able to have sex with somebody or just walk in the world from a place like that, but also with having an open heart. And that flavor is, I think, I've talked to tons of men who say that they feel afraid of really like taking their girlfriend or really like ravishing their partner, and their partners want this, but they're afraid of being the aggressive guy. You know,
Yeah.
they're afraid of being the too much, like having too big of sexual desire, too like all of this kind of stuff. And at the same time, you hear all these women saying, I just want my partner to take me. I
Yeah.
just want to be ravished. And I'm like, why are we missing each other here? What's happening? Like you both want this thing, but it's so hard to do,
Yeah.
you know? And I think like there's a lot of reasons why it is the way that it is, you know? And that could be a whole 10 podcast
Yeah.
series, you know? But what I would say is like starting to do some work around understanding that, the reasons why it is the way it is, and then
Mhm.
how to start to move beyond that is massively important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so many of the men who I speak to and I say, who were your positive examples of strong masculinity? Like positive examples. The majority of
Yeah,
men are like, maybe I had one, maybe I had two, maybe they were both movie characters, you know? There aren't a lot of examples of a healthy version of that I'm gonna fuck you and I'm gonna kill you when he tries to stop me kind of thing. Well, yeah,
totally.
the fierceness
With love too. Yeah.
with love, and that's the thing is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we see that energy, that fierceness, that impulse to fuck, that impulse to protect, that the depths of that fierceness and even potentially like anger or just that power.
Hmm.
We don't see a lot of examples of that being expressed in a healthy and safe way. So it actually
Totally.
becomes there's sort of this whole perception wrapped around it of those energies are dangerous energies.
100%.
The way that I see it, the safest men are the ones who have access to those. Because if you shut them down, two things will happen. Well, an infinite array of things can happen, but I see two main
Yeah.
areas. And one is those expressions or urges or impulses or desires find other ways to get come out. All of a sudden, you lose your shit, or you all of a sudden feel like so angry and you don't know what to do with it, or you have this kind of outburst where it doesn't, or you feel totally directed by your sexual energy. There are these ways where it finds its way through, or you feel totally shut down, disconnected from your power, disconnected from your sex. And so there is a
And then oftentimes blame other people for it.
totally,
Yeah.
totally, yeah. In a whole, you see a lot of different archetypes of how that how that plays
Totally.
out. But
Yeah.
for me, the safest men are the ones who safest and like in my personal humble opinion, sexy, super sexy uh, way of expressing is I've got access to these expressions. I've got access to my aggression or my
Hmm.
protectiveness or my urge or impulse to fuck and to take and to ravish,
Hmm.
but slash and I'm able to be in those expressions with a depth of heart and a depth of presence. I can be in that while feeling myself, while feeling my love in general, while feeling my love for you. And so those expressions, when they're tied in with love and presence, actually become so deeply safe and are so deeply, deeply desired. And so I think there's a whole process of navigation on how do I access those while doing it in a way that isn't blasting past my own capacity to be present and in my heart.
Totally. So, yeah, let me just give a practical example of a way that you
Please.
could play with this if you're a guy. Super simple. Just next time you go into a self pleasure session, try to find some music that feels like maybe it's like a little primal, or like something that evokes this sort of like kind of energy within you. And then when you masturbate while you're touching yourself, see if you can just embody. And when I say embody, like move your body, act as if you are this like like you're in the energy of smash, or you're in the energy of fuck or something like that while you're touching yourself to this music, and like move in that way. Don't just sort of lay back and kind of slither around in your self pleasure, but like maybe even sit upright and just like like be here and like rock your hips back and forth and try to cultivate the energy of warrior, or try to cultivate the energy of like, yeah, I'm gonna fuck you so good, and like hold that and just be with it, and see if you can infuse your self pleasure practice with that energy, and see if you can start to get comfortable with it, because it feels edgy for a lot of guys to start to touch that if you've never touched it before, because a lot of us have had internal shame around that because of all the societal stuff too. But it's really sexy
Yeah.
to start to like unlock some of that, and then to start to become friends with it and be like, oh, this is actually celebrated and people want this too,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And the safest thing you can do is know yourself in those spaces.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and something that I find is very common with men is that in the first couple times where they start doing practices like that, where there's this accessing those really intense energies, it can be quite overwhelming at first, or feel
Mm,
quite dangerous, or feel quite, wait, I pushed those down for a reason. But the staying with yourself, the willingness to meet yourself, to be with it, to be with the discomfort, to be with the, whoa, this is more energy than I'm used to feeling, and to
mhm.
stay present with yourself, to stay loving with yourself, and to engage from that place, and being willing to increase your capacity to explore those worlds. It's incredibly sexy, incredibly powerful, and so needed, so desired, so wanted, so longed for.
Totally. And then maybe start to play with the microcosmic orbit. Or any of those other techniques.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to hear, we just have a few minutes left, but I'd love to hear a little baby bit about your men's sexual mastery program. I haven't really heard about it yet. And I'm so curious what you do in your program. And for anybody who's interested in learning more from you, would love
Thanks.
to hear from you what that's all about.
Yeah. Well, also just to say, like, I appreciate the ask for that, considering that we do similar things. And one of the one of the joys that I have is connecting with other people who are doing similar work, and realizing that different people will gravitate towards different people, just because that's the way the world works. And like there's an abundance of people who are wanting to learn all kinds of stuff. And like, how
Yeah.
many yoga teachers are there? Millions, you
Yeah.
know.
How many
So
men's
the
sexual
program,
mastery teachers are there? Like maybe 18. No,
yeah,
there's more
if
than that,
that.
but
Are there?
I'm
Yeah, I don't
sure.
know more. I don't know more than 18.
I don't
But
either. I'm sure they
yeah,
exist.
so my program, the program I run, is it's called Orgasmic Mastery, and it's 10 weeks long. And it really came together first to help guys overcome sexual dysfunction, and then to help them move into the place of feeling just fucking awesome about sex. Long story short, and I start people off slow with a deconditioning process to just come back to the body, away from porn, away from fantasy. And then we build practices on top of that in a group setting over the course of those 10 weeks. I will say it's interesting timing. Like the next time this course runs, it will be February of 2025. The course is going to go through a renovation, renewal, perhaps new version entirely process by next summer. Because it's yeah, I've learned a whole lot of new stuff that I want to put into it that I'm excited about. It's still awesome, and I'm like, cool, let's infuse some more goodness into it.
Mm,
But I love it. It's one of my favorite things to gather with a group of men and talk about this stuff every week in real time. Yeah,
beautiful. I love it. I love it.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Thanks for asking.
something you and I chatted about when we were at the retreat in Costa Rica together is just the vast difference of this information coming from a woman and coming from a man. And there are some people who are like, I only want to learn this from a man. And there are some people who are like, I only want to learn this from a woman. Or there are some people who are like,
Totally.
those are going to be very different experiences in terms of the transmission of your personal experience of having a cock and doing all these practices, and my experience of receiving cock and having the experience on that end of the
Yeah.
interaction of the dynamic. And so yeah, I'm so stoked about supporting your work and continuing to witness your evolution in all of this. It's so fucking important, and it's so
Yeah,
beautiful, and it's so relevant to our world right now, both because there's this huge sexual revolution happening and because of the importance of men feeling themselves, knowing themselves, mastering themselves, being the best, hottest, safest versions of themselves possible. So
for
I have
sure.
so much appreciation for the work that you're doing and being
Yeah.
able to meet you and have you as a friend and a peer and all of it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And there's just one thing just to like get real meta right there at the end, like something that happened for me when you were just speaking that I'm curious if anyone listening, if this happened for you, like when you said the word cock, and then when you said like I receive cock, like what I noticed both times is like even that word, like saying the word cock, sometimes there can be this like zzz that happens
Mhm.
with it, or like a whoa, there's like a there's a charge sometimes that I
Yeah.
feel with that word, and like in the past I have felt maybe fear or something
Mhm.
associated with that. Same with the word pussy. But I think cock is a little bit more like, it's like boom, kind of, kind of a thing. And so like when you said it just then, it was this cool experience internally of like, when the word is said with reverence, there's like this potent, powerful reverence that is cock energy,
Mm.
and just like, oh, cool. Like owning that, like, yeah, I felt that. And I wondered if anyone else listening, if you noticed
Mhm.
inside yourself, like some sort of embodied response when Fabian said that, like, just want to say, like, I also experienced something. And I think it's cool to start noticing how words impact us too. So anyway, thanks for that. And thank you
Amazing.
so much for having me here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. And that's something that I truly believe is such an important piece to the sexual revolution around men's sexuality is and with women as well, and with or I'll say people with pussies and people with cocks, is the reclamation of the depth of power behind this area of the body and the word itself.
For
And
sure.
the approach of, because so many of us do have some response, some physical response to these words, to the word cock, to the energy of cock, to the assumptions that we make about the sort of personality of cock, but to really see
Hmm.
cock as something that is so beautiful, so important, so powerful, so vulnerable, and to hold the universal cock with so much reverence, so much respect, so much care, so much love, so much appreciation for the life-giving vessel sort of light that it is. And so I'm really glad you spoke to that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
So, if people want to get in touch with you, I know you have an amazing YouTube channel where you have tons of amazing free content. You have a podcast of your own, which is taylorjohnson.life/podcast
Yeah.
is where people can find that. And what's the name of your podcast again?
Podcast is called Sex Upgraded.
Sex Upgraded.
Yeah. I
Beautiful.
wanted people to see the title and know exactly what it was about immediately.
Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And then your YouTube is at Taylor Clark Johnson. And
Yeah.
so people can find you there. You also have an amazing Instagram with lots of great content on there.
Mm,
Your YouTube is full of those podcast episodes and lots of other amazing instructional, impactful videos. So anyone who's listening, please go check out Taylor's amazing work. And once again, thank you so much. I so deeply appreciate what you're doing, your way of speaking about it, your clarity, your humility, your dedication to your own self practice, your dedication to
mm,
your partnership, and to your work in general. So, thank you. I feel so blessed to
mm.
be able to have these conversations with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been a real treat. Thanks for sharing this time.